few days before his assassination, President Abraham Lincoln told several close friends about a disturbing dream. In it, he wandered through the White House and came upon a coffin. When he asked who had died, a soldier answered, "The president. He was killed by an assassin." Lincoln was deeply unsettled. He couldn't shake the image. Not long after, the dream became reality. This story is one of the most striking historical examples of synchronicity, tied to dreams and intuition. It's been studied not just in psychology, but in theology, mysticism, and consciousness research. How could a dream so vividly foreshadow an event? Was it chance? A message from the unconscious? Or something more? If this kind of moment fascinates you, those eerie alignments between inner experience and outer events, stay with me. We're about to dive into how synchronicity works, at the intersection of psychology, quantum physics, and ancient wisdom. Especially in Part 8, I'll walk you through how to actively increase synchronicity in your life. This isn't abstract theory. I'm talking about simple things you can start doing right after this video ends, that actually create more space for meaningful coincidences to show up. I've pulled from research, spiritual practices, and real-life accounts to give you something grounded, clear, and usable. If content like this speaks to you, help this channel reach its first 1,000 subscribers by tapping like and subscribe, not just for the numbers, but because it tells me you want more of this. And trust me, what's coming next goes even deeper. In the 1920s, Carl Jung began noticing a strange pattern in his therapy sessions. Patients would share dreams or symbols that somehow showed up in real life without explanation. In one famous case, a woman described a dream involving a golden scarab beetle. As she spoke, Jung heard a tapping at the window. He opened it, and in flew a beetle nearly identical to the one from her dream. Jung didn't see it as magic. He saw it as something deeper, a moment where the inner world and outer world aligned in a meaningful, acausal way. This was the birth of synchronicity. Jung defined synchronicity as the simultaneous occurrence of two events that are not causally related, but are connected through personal meaning. It's when life mirrors something inside you, not through logic, but through resonance. You think of someone and they call. A dream reflects a future event. A book lands in your hands with the exact phrase you needed. There's no direct cause, but the timing, and more importantly, the meaning, makes you pause. He linked this phenomenon to the process of individuation, the journey of becoming whole. For Jung, synchronicity wasn't a fluke. It was part of how the unconscious communicates during moments of transformation. When you're close to a breakthrough, symbols show up. Life seems to reflect the shift already happening inside. It's not just coincidence. It's a mirror. Jung wasn't alone in this line of thinking. He explored it deeply with Wolfgang Pauli, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist and early pioneer of quantum mechanics. Pauli believed that synchronicity might reflect the nonlinear, non-local aspects of quantum reality. In quantum entanglement, for instance, two particles, once connected, can instantly affect one another across vast distances without any signal passing between them. This isn't science fiction, it's verified physics, and it breaks the classic model of cause and effect. If matter can act this way, maybe meaning can too. This idea also echoes ancient philosophy, especially in the East. In Taoism, the principle of Tao describes a natural order that flows through everything. When you're aligned with it, things happen effortlessly. Timing feels right, paths open. Buddhism's concept of karma suggests that life unfolds through a web of cause and effect that's far more complex than we can perceive, shaped by intention, awareness, and past actions, not just immediate triggers. In Judaism, Hashgacha Prudit refers to divine providence in every small detail of life, suggesting that even chance meetings or accidents may hold purpose. In all of these views, synchronicity isn't random. It's a signal, a sign that your inner state is in dialogue with something greater. Call it the universe, the field, the unconscious, or the quantum layer of reality. You don't need to name it to feel it. From a broader lens, synchronicity might be a bridge, a link between classical physics and the strange laws of quantum mechanics, between the conscious mind and the collective unconscious, between linear time and layered experience. It suggests there are structures beneath reality we haven't fully mapped, a system not based on control, but on coherence. We may not be able to measure synchronicity the way we measure gravity, but we can recognize its pattern, its timing, its ability to wake us up and remind us that meaning isn't always made, it's sometimes found, waiting just outside our line of sight. You're walking down the street, lost in thought, worrying about a big decision, maybe a job offer, a breakup, a move. You're not talking to anyone about it. You haven't even fully worked it out in your own head. Then, out of nowhere, you pass a shop window with a quote that seems to speak directly to you. Something simple like, "Trust the process." It stops you for a second. You feel it in your chest. Not because the words are profound, but because they showed up at the exact right moment. That's a good example of what Carl Jung called synchronicity. It's when two things happen at the same time, a thought and an event, but there's no clear cause linking them. Still, the moment feels meaningful, personal, as if something beyond you is part of the conversation. So how do we tell the difference between synchronicity and simple coincidence? It often comes down to how it feels. Regular coincidences are easy to forget, but synchronicity tends to leave a strong emotional mark. People describe feeling chills, a deep sense of recognition, or a strange clarity. The moment feels charged, like it means something more than it logically should. It might not give you a clear answer, but it can shift how you see a situation. There's also a pattern of timing. Synchronicities usually show up when we're at a crossroads, feeling uncertain, overwhelmed, or in the middle of a change. It's like the mind becomes more open during those times, and we start noticing things we'd normally overlook. You might dream the same symbol several nights in a row, or keep hearing the same phrase in different places. These repetitions often feel too specific to be random. There's actually a brain-based explanation for why this happens. It's called the reticular activating system, RAS. This part of your brain acts like a filter, deciding what information is important and what to ignore. If something is on your mind, consciously or unconsciously, your RAS starts noticing anything related to it. That's why, for example, if you're thinking of getting a dog, you suddenly see dogs everywhere. Your brain is tuned in, but synchronicity goes beyond just noticing. It often feels like the outside world reflects what's happening inside you, like your thoughts, emotions, or private struggles are mirrored in subtle but precise ways. And while the brain can explain the mechanics of attention, it doesn't fully explain why these moments often arrive with such emotional impact or perfect timing. Some scientists and psychologists are skeptical. They call this apophenia, the tendency to see patterns in random information. And yes, our brains are wired to find patterns, but that doesn't mean every pattern we notice is meaningless. What matters is how it connects to what we're going through. The meaning doesn't come from the event alone. It comes from the context, from you. You don't need to believe in anything mystical to take synchronicity seriously. You just need to be honest about your own experience. Have you ever had a moment where something unexpected gave you clarity or helped you feel less alone in your thoughts? That's what synchronicity offers. It's not about predicting the future or proving anything. It's about paying attention, noticing when the world seems to respond to you, not with answers, but with small, quiet nudges. You know that feeling when something just doesn't sit right? Or, on the flip side, when something feels so aligned it's almost eerie? That's your intuition speaking. And when it comes to recognizing synchronicity, intuition is your most important tool. The challenge is, most of us are so caught up in daily noise, routines, notifications, overthinking, that we miss the signals. Training yourself to notice synchronicities isn't about believing harder. It's about listening better, and that's something you can practice. Mindfulness is where that starts. When your mind is racing, it filters the world through stress, judgment, and distraction. You're thinking 5 steps ahead or replaying the past, not noticing what's unfolding right now. Mindfulness, being present, aware without reacting, reduces that mental noise, tunes down the overactive logic, and gives space for quiet signals to come through. That moment of stillness where something just clicks, that's the space synchronicity tends to show up in. If you're new to mindfulness, start simple. Take 5 minutes a day to sit quietly, focus on your breath, and just notice what thoughts arise without judging them. The point isn't to empty your mind, it's to become aware of it. But awareness alone isn't enough. You have to start tracking it. Intuitive journaling is a simple but powerful habit. Write down coincidences, strange patterns, dreams, gut feelings, even if they seem small or don't make sense yet. Don't worry about being eloquent, just get it out. Over time, these notes become a kind of personal data set. You start to see what symbols show up for you, how your intuition speaks, and how often certain kinds of synchronicities happen during specific phases in your life. It's like building your own language with the unconscious. And don't ignore your body in all this. Your body often reacts to things before your brain catches up. This is sometimes called soma intuition. You get goosebumps, a tight chest, a sudden jolt of energy, or that deep stillness that tells you, pay attention. These aren't random sensations, they're signals. Your nervous system is picking up on patterns before your conscious mind can analyze them. Try checking in with your body the next time something unexpected happens. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? And where in my body do I feel it? Dreams, too, are a major portal. Jung considered dreams the stage, where synchronicities are rehearsed before showing up in waking life. Dreams speak in images and metaphors, much like synchronicities do. They're not always literal, but they often reflect emotional truths or hidden tensions. Start a dream journal. Keep it by your bed. Write anything you remember as soon as you wake up, even fragments. Over time, you might notice themes or symbols that reappear, not just in dreams, but in real life. The more you pay attention to these elements, stillness, sensation, symbols, the more fluent you become in the language of synchronicity. It's not about forcing meaning onto everything or becoming overly mystical. It's about becoming more attuned to the patterns that shape your experience. Recognizing when something is just random and when something feels like a signal. Start noticing how your body reacts before your mind interprets. Start writing things down before they fade. Start sitting with silence even for a few minutes a day. It's not about getting it perfect. It's about becoming available to the parts of reality that don't shout, but whisper. Over time, you'll begin to see that synchronicity isn't rare or strange. It's always happening. The question is whether you're quiet enough to hear it. The mind is everything. What you think, you become. This teaching from the Buddha captures more than just personal mindset. It points to a deeper principle that echoes across ancient spiritual traditions. Reality responds to consciousness. And in many of those traditions, what we now call synchronicity was never seen as strange. It was expected. Life wasn't random. It was responsive. In Buddhism, cause and effect go far beyond simple action and consequence. The idea of karma isn't just do good, get good. It's multi-layered, stretching across time, lifetimes, and levels of awareness. What you think, feel, and intend carries weight, creating ripples that may return in unexpected forms. So when something unusual happens, a person shows up right when you're in need, or a symbol appears in your dream that mirrors a waking fear, it's not just coincidence. It's part of a web of causes and conditions shaped by your inner state. Synchronicity, from this view, is the visible echo of invisible karmic threads. Taoism brings a different flavor but points to a similar insight. At the heart of Taoist thought is Wu Wei, the art of non-forcing, or flowing with the natural order. The Tao itself isn't something you control. It's something you align with. When you're in sync with the Tao, things seem to fall into place. Events connect smoothly. Doors open without struggle. What we call synchronicity is, in Taoist language, the sign that you're no longer swimming against the current. You're flowing with it, and the universe reflects that alignment in subtle, almost poetic ways. In shamanic traditions, especially among indigenous cultures in the Americas, Africa, and Siberia, synchronicity is understood as communication. Not metaphorical, but literal. Nature, dreams, animals, whether these are messengers. If a hawk circles overhead right after a difficult decision, or lightning strikes during a ritual, that's not a random event. It's a signal. Shamans are trained to listen, to read patterns in the environment the way others read words on a page. The natural world isn't separate from the sacred. It is the sacred, and synchronicity is one way it speaks. Christianity has its own lens on this phenomenon. While it doesn't use the term synchronicity, the idea of divine signs is woven throughout the faith. A prayer answered in an unexpected way. A sense of peace right after asking for guidance. A passage from scripture read at just the right moment. These are seen not as accidents, but as God moments. Subtle signs that divine presence is active in daily life. In contemplative traditions like Christian mysticism, the inner life and outer world are seen as deeply linked, and grace often shows up in the form of timing. In Jewish mysticism, especially through Kabbalah, this connection is even more explicit. The concept of Hashgacha Pradit, individual divine providence, holds that nothing in your life is random. Not even the leaf falling outside your window. Everything has meaning, even if that meaning isn't immediately visible. This isn't fatalism. It's a belief in a hidden structure behind reality, one that combines divine intention with human choice. In this framework, synchronicity isn't a glitch. It's part of the system. Step back and a bigger picture emerges. Across continents and centuries, spiritual traditions have shared a core assumption. The world is not chaotic. It's patterned, not always predictable, but responsive. In ancient Egypt, the principle of Ma'at represented balance and cosmic order. In the Vedic tradition of India, Ta referred to the universal rhythm that connected nature, humans, and gods. Even in the myths of indigenous Australia, the dreaming is a timeless space, where past, present, and meaning are all layered together. Modern culture often frames life as mechanical, cause and effect, action and outcome, nothing more. But ancient cultures saw life as a conversation between you and something greater. Synchronicity, in that view, is simply the moment the conversation becomes audible. It doesn't mean every strange event has a hidden message, but it suggests that when something aligns perfectly, internally and externally, it might be worth listening, not to force meaning where there is none, but to consider that the universe may be speaking in a language older than words. In the early 1980s, Paulo Coelho was a struggling songwriter in Brazil, unsure of his path. On a trip to Spain, he walked the Camino de Santiago and had a strange, overwhelming feeling that he was meant to be a writer, not someday but now. No publisher was calling. No audience was waiting. But the signs kept showing up. A conversation here, a sentence in a book there. Dreams that repeated the same message. Write the story you've been carrying. He listened. He wrote The Alchemist in 2 weeks. First, it flopped. Barely any copies sold. But then something strange started happening. One person would read it, then pass it on. A publisher in another country would pick it up, without even knowing why. Synchronicities began stacking, like stepping stones. Today, the book has sold over 150 million copies. Pauli himself has said it wasn't strategy. It was surrender. He followed the signs, even when they made no sense. This is where synchronicity becomes more than just curiosity. It becomes a compass. When certain themes, symbols, or situations start repeating in your life, especially when they show up from unrelated sources, it may not be random. It may be a kind of calling, not dramatic or loud, but persistent. A quiet tap on the shoulder saying, "This way." It usually starts small. A subject keeps coming up in conversations. You stumble across articles or books about the same idea. You meet someone who's already doing the thing you've been secretly considering. The world doesn't give you a detailed plan, but it gives you signals, and when they cluster around a certain direction or identity, artist, teacher, healer, builder, it might be worth following. One way to engage with this is through a simple practice. Ask the universe a question, not a yes/no question, but something honest, something real. What am I here to do? What needs to come through me? Write it down. Then live with the question. Don't force an answer. Just notice. See what shows up. In books, in conversations, in random lines from songs or overheard chatter. What patterns repeat? What stirs something in you? The key here isn't to turn life into a puzzle, where everything must mean something. It's to treat your experience as alive, to be curious enough to ask, and open enough to notice what replies. Think of synchronicity as a co-created language between you and the deeper structure of life. Part intuition, part pattern, part timing. You don't have to be mystical to use it. You just have to be willing to notice when something clicks in a way logic can't fully explain, when the same message finds you 3 times in 1 week from unrelated sources. Pay attention. When something gives you that full body yes, write it down. Start building your own map, even if it's made of fragments. Over time, those fragments form a path. Not all synchronicities point to a life-changing mission, but the ones that do often won't go away. They keep circling back, gently, until you're ready. The call doesn't scream, it repeats. And if you're willing to listen, it might just lead you to the work only you can do. In 1997, researchers at the University of Illinois conducted a simple yet revealing experiment. Participants watched a video of people passing a basketball and were told to count how many times the ball was passed. Midway through the clip, a person in a gorilla suit walked straight through the scene, beat their chest, and walked out. Almost half the participants never saw the gorilla. They were so focused on the task that they filtered out everything else. This experiment, known as the invisible gorilla test, became a landmark in cognitive psychology, showing how our brains are wired to focus selectively and how much we miss when we're locked into narrow perception. It also highlights a key point in understanding synchronicity from a scientific angle. We see what we're prepared to see, and often, we don't see what falls outside that framework. Cognitive psychology has long argued that the human brain is a pattern-detecting machine. It evolved to spot connections between sounds, shapes, events, because seeing patterns helped our ancestors survive. If you heard rustling in the bushes and saw a glimpse of fur, assuming there's a predator, even if you're wrong, was safer than missing the sign. But this instinct for pattern recognition can also lead to false positives. We see faces in clouds. We hear meaning in static. Psychologists call this apophenia, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in random data. So when someone keeps seeing the number 1111, or finds repeated symbols in their dreams, the skeptical view is that it's just this cognitive bias at work. The brain is looking for patterns, and once it locks onto one, it filters the world through that lens. Feels meaningful, but it's not objective. That's the standard explanation. But neuroscience adds another layer. The brain doesn't just process information consciously. In fact, most of what it does is unconscious. Our sensory systems take in massive amounts of data every second, but we're only aware of a tiny slice. And yet, that unconscious data can still influence us. Studies using EEG and fMRI have shown that the brain often responds to stimuli, emotional expressions, visual cues, environmental signals, before the conscious mind even registers them. This is the basis of what many scientists now call intuition, a kind of fast thinking that draws on subtle signals we can't yet explain logically. This helps explain why some synchronicities feel like guidance. It's not magic. It's your brain responding to things you haven't consciously noticed yet. You pick up on someone's mood before they speak. You have a strong feeling not to take a certain route, and later find out there was an accident there. These moments feel like signs, but they may just be highly complex, preconscious pattern recognition. Still, just because they can be explained doesn't mean they're not meaningful. The experience is real, even if the mechanics are invisible. Another perspective comes from the more controversial territory of quantum thinking and personal development. According to the law of attraction, popularized by books like The Secret, your thoughts and emotions act like a broadcast signal, attracting events and people that match your inner state. Critics argue it oversimplifies human experience, but figures like Dr. Joe Dispenza have added nuance to the idea, blending neuroscience with practical exercises. He suggests that when we combine elevated emotion with clear intention, visualizing the life we want, while feeling gratitude or joy as if it's already happened, we begin to tune the brain and body into a new reality. From this view, synchronicities are not random. They're feedback, showing that our internal world is starting to shift our external one. Of course, these ideas are hard to test in a lab. Science prefers what can be measured, repeated, and isolated, but human experience doesn't always follow that rulebook. That's why a growing number of researchers and thinkers suggest a middle path. You don't have to believe in synchronicity blindly, and you don't have to dismiss it outright either. Instead, observe, be curious, track your own experiences. Are you seeing certain patterns? Do certain thoughts or questions seem to echo back to you through unexpected events? If so, explore it, not as superstition, but as personal data. The scientific method doesn't have to stay in the lab. You can apply it to your life. Synchronicity may never be fully explained by science, but that doesn't make it meaningless. It just means we might be dealing with a kind of order that doesn't fit neatly into current models, one that blends logic with emotion, structure with mystery, and attention with experience. When people start tuning into synchronicity, their lives often shift in subtle but powerful ways. They make decisions with more confidence. They feel guided, less alone. New opportunities seem to arrive with uncanny timing. Unexpected conversations unlock clarity. It's not that life becomes easier, but it starts to feel more meaningful, as if something underneath the surface is working with them, not against them. That's the quiet magic of synchronicity. When you learn to recognize it, and even more when you learn how to invite it. The first step is creating space to actually receive. Most people are too mentally crowded to notice subtle patterns. Constant distraction blocks the signals. If you want more synchronicity, you need more stillness. Even a few minutes of quiet each day can shift the channel. It's like turning down static, so you can finally hear the song. This doesn't require retreating to a monastery. Just build simple pockets of pause. Sitting with your coffee without a screen. Walking without music. Letting thoughts rise and fall without chasing them. Journaling is another powerful tool. Start keeping a synchronicity journal. Not to make sense of everything immediately, but to collect. Write down small coincidences, dreams, recurring numbers, strange moments that feel out of place but oddly timed. First, it may seem like noise, but over time, you start seeing links, symbols that repeat, emotions that match, questions you didn't know you were asking, getting answered in roundabout ways. You're building a map of your unconscious language. And the more you write, the more fluent you become in it. Meditation supports this, not just for calming the mind, but for restoring the connection between your conscious and unconscious self. Jung often said that synchronicity arises from the unconscious expressing itself through the outer world. But that dialogue only happens when the channel is open. Meditation is how you clear the line. You don't need to force anything. Just sit, breathe, and allow what comes. Even 5 to 10 minutes a day is enough to sharpen your awareness. Another practice that opens the door to synchronicity is gratitude, not in the vague social media sense, but as a real emotional state. When you feel genuine gratitude, your nervous system shifts, your brain enters coherence, you become more receptive. Grateful people naturally notice more good around them, not because their lives are perfect, but because their attention is tuned to it. And when your energy shifts into a higher, more open frequency, the world tends to reflect that back in surprising ways. One more technique, simple but surprisingly effective, is asking a question before you sleep. The moments before sleep are when your conscious mind lets go and the unconscious becomes more active. So ask something clearly. What should I focus on right now? What's blocking me? What's my next step? Don't expect a lightning bolt. Just ask, sleep, and observe. Over the next few days, pay attention to dreams, gut feelings, or repeated messages in your waking life. Answers tend to arrive sideways, not straight on. You can't control synchronicity, but you can become someone who lives in dialogue with it. That means slowing down enough to notice, staying curious enough to explore, and open enough to receive. It's not about making every event mystical. It's about creating the conditions where the meaningful can break through the noise. And when it does, you'll feel it. The timing, the relevance, that quiet but clear sense that something just clicked. In the days and weeks leading up to 9/11, many people reported a vague but persistent feeling of unease. Nightmares, strange dreams, a collective sense that something was about to happen, though no one could say what. After the attacks, these reports flooded in from across the world. People who felt the tension before the event, who couldn't explain why. It wasn't prediction. It wasn't logic. It was a ripple through the collective unconscious. Something Jung spoke of often. When deep shifts approach, we sometimes feel them before they arrive. This is where synchronicity moves beyond the personal. Collective synchronicity happens when patterns, symbols, or emotional responses begin showing up across large groups, sometimes entire cultures, without coordination. It's as if society itself starts picking up a message at the same time. You can see it in art, music, even in everyday conversations. The rise of certain themes in movies, the popularity of specific symbols, the fact that people in different parts of the world, with no connection to one another, start having the same ideas. Look at history. The telephone was developed independently by both Alexander Graham Bell and Elisha Gray, within hours of each other. Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace both formulated the theory of evolution by natural selection around the same time, completely independently. These are just a few of many cases where the same innovation appears in different minds simultaneously. It's not always coincidence. It's often synchronicity on a cultural scale. The idea was ready to be discovered, and it found multiple doors open. Modern science has begun to explore this in more direct ways. The Global Consciousness Project, based at Princeton University, set out to test whether human consciousness can have a measurable impact on physical systems. They placed random number generators around the world, devices designed to spit out unpredictable, meaningless data. But something strange happened during major global events. 9/11, the 2004 tsunami, the death of Princess Diana. The data showed significant deviations from randomness. As if human emotion, focused and collective, was affecting physical systems across the planet. While the science here is still controversial and not fully understood, the pattern is hard to ignore. When a large number of people are emotionally synchronized, through grief, shock, awe, or even joy, something measurable seems to shift. This suggests that consciousness may not be entirely isolated in individual brains, that there may be a field, a network, a shared mental space that connects us more deeply than we think. In this view, synchronicity isn't just a private experience. It's part of how culture evolves, how paradigms shift, how new ways of thinking emerge. When enough people start noticing the same thing, asking the same questions, or experiencing similar insights, creates momentum, a tipping point, the 100th monkey effect, some call it. And once that threshold is crossed, ideas that once seemed fringe or invisible can suddenly become mainstream, seemingly overnight. This has big implications. It means personal awareness isn't just for personal growth. It contributes to the collective. When you tune into synchronicity, follow your intuition, or question your patterns, you're participating in a larger process. You're helping shift the cultural frequency, even if just a little. And when many people start doing that at once, change becomes possible, not just inside, but out there. So if you've ever felt something that others seem to feel too, before a crisis, during a breakthrough, or in moments of deep change, you're not imagining it. You're tapping into something shared, something real. Collective synchronicity reminds us we're not just individuals having private thoughts. We're part of a larger mind, one that listens, echoes, and sometimes, if we're quiet enough, responds. After everything you've just watched, what's coming up for you? Did a specific moment flash through your mind? A recent coincidence that suddenly feels a little less random? Maybe a dream, a repeated symbol, a conversation that struck a strange chord? Pay attention to that, because synchronicity isn't just a theory to understand. It's a tool to use. But here's the truth. Synchronicity won't hand you a step-by-step plan. It's not a GPS. It's a compass. It won't tell you exactly where to go, but it will point toward what feels aligned, alive, honest. It opens the door, but you still have to walk through. That's where choice comes in. When you start noticing meaningful patterns, repeated signs, intuitive nudges, it's tempting to ask, is this a sign I should go for it? But that's not how synchronicity works. It doesn't decide for you. It responds to your inner state. When you move in a direction that's aligned with who you really are, synchronicity often increases. You might feel more flow, more yes moments, more things falling into place. That's not magic. It's feedback. On the flip side, if you take a step and suddenly feel tension, confusion, or see repeated red flags, pay attention. That too is feedback. It doesn't always mean you made the wrong choice, but it's a cue to pause, reflect, and ask, is this resistance because I'm growing? Or is this friction because I'm off track? Your emotional state is one of the clearest indicators. Not the highs and lows of mood, but the deeper feeling underneath. When you think about a path, do you feel heavy, tight, uncertain? Or is there a sense of clarity, even if it's scary? A feeling of lightness, even if the outcome is unknown? The body often knows, before the mind does. So here's the real invitation. Don't just wait for synchronicity to show up. Engage with it. Make a decision, big or small, and then observe what happens afterward. Are the symbols and signals increasing or fading? Does life seem to open or contract? That's how you work with synchronicity in real time. You don't need to be certain. You just need to stay present, curious, and willing to adjust. Life is less about perfect answers and more about honest direction. Synchronicity won't give you guarantees, but it will give you signals. And sometimes, that's more than enough. Synchronicity isn't about proving anything. It's not a hard fact, a fixed rule, or a universal law. It's a subtle intersection where intuition meets experience, where belief touches mystery, where your attention shapes your reality. It's not about answers. It's about awareness. Think of it as the universe whispering, not shouting. Most people miss it because they're too distracted, too certain, or too busy to notice. But for those who are present, who pause, who pay attention, synchronicity becomes more than strange timing. It becomes a guide, a mirror, a quiet invitation to live more deeply aligned with who you are and why you're here. You don't have to believe in anything mystical to engage with it. You just have to observe, reflect, let your own life be the evidence. And if something in what you've just explored resonated with you, if it made you rethink, remember, or reawaken something inside, then this message found you for a reason. So don't scroll past and forget. Hit like, subscribe, not for algorithms, but because you want to stay in the room. When conversations like this happen, this space is for people who think, feel, question, and notice. If that's you, stick around. The next sign might be closer than you think.